The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, the kind of place where hope usually went quiet. Afternoon light slid through tall windows, catching dust in the air as Darius Cole, 17, stood alone at the defense table. His hands were folded too tightly, knuckles pale, suit borrowed and a size too big. When the judge leaned forward and laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoed harder than the gavel ever could. "Do you even understand where you are, son?" the judge said, amusement dripping from every word. Darius swallowed. The room already had an answer for him. "Before the story pulls you any further, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now?" Stories like this travel farther than we ever expect. Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's remind ourselves how connected we really are. The judge's name was Harold Whitman, a man who had spent 30 years on the bench and believed he could read guilt in posture alone. He leaned back in his chair, eyes scanning Darius like an inconvenience on his schedule. The prosecutor shuffled papers with bored precision. In the back row, Darius's mother, Naomi, pressed her hands together as if prayer alone could hold the ceiling up. The charge was minor, trespassing after hours at a private library, but the tone in the room made it feel heavier. Darius had been found inside at midnight, surrounded by books, alarms blaring. To Judge Whitman, it was simple. Another kid who didn't know his place. "You broke the law," the judge said. "And judging by your silence, you don't have much to say for yourself." Darius lifted his head. His voice, when it came, was calm but young. "Your Honor, I'd like to explain." Whitman smirked. "Explain? This should be good." What the judge didn't know, what no one here knew, was that Darius had been sleeping in his mother's car for 3 months. Naomi worked nights at a nursing home, double shifts when she could get them. Darius spent evenings at the public library until it closed, then found ways to keep reading wherever he could. That private law library had left a side door unlocked. He'd only meant to study until morning. Books were the only place Darius felt steady. Law books especially. He liked how rules had logic, how justice, at least on paper, was supposed to make sense. But the courtroom didn't care about paper dreams. Whitman leaned forward again. "You expect me to believe you were trespassing to read?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Son, do you even know what those books are for?" Naomi flinched. Darius didn't look at her. He'd learned early how to stand alone without showing it hurt. "They're case reporters," Darius said. "Mostly state appellate decisions." The volume I was on discussed procedural due process in juvenile cases. The laughter stopped, just for a second. The prosecutor looked up. A few murmurs rippled through the gallery. Whitman narrowed his eyes. "Big words don't change facts." Darius nodded. "No, sir. But facts change outcomes." There was something in the way he said it. Not defiant, not pleading, just certain. Whitman cleared his throat, annoyed. "You're not here to argue law." "With respect," Darius replied softly, "everyone here is." Silence fell, thick and uncomfortable. Naomi's eyes filled, not with fear this time, but confusion. This wasn't the boy who came home tired and quiet. This was someone else, someone standing straighter. Whitman felt it too, though he hated that he did. He dismissed it quickly, tapping his pen. "I'll hear your explanation." Briefly. Darius took a breath. The kind you take before stepping onto a stage you never asked for but trained for anyway. He began to speak, not fast, not rehearsed, about intent, about access, about how the law treated knowledge differently from malice. He cited cases by name. Years. Victims. Not to impress, but to clarify. The courtroom seemed to lean in without realizing it. And as Darius spoke, Judge Whitman felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not anger, not amusement, but the creeping sense that he might have laughed too soon. The judge opened his mouth to interrupt, just as Darius turned a page of notes he wasn't supposed to have, and said something that made the room inhale at once. "Your Honor, if I may, the statute you're relying on was limited by a ruling you authored yourself in 2009 and..." The air shifted the moment Darius mentioned the ruling. Judge Whitman froze, pen hovering midair. His eyes flicked to the clerk, then back to the boy standing before him. "What did you say?" Whitman asked, slower now. Darius didn't smile. He didn't push. He simply repeated the citation, word for word, even correcting himself once, quietly, when he realized he'd misstated a page number. In State versus Harper, Your Honor, you wrote that intent must be weighed alongside circumstance, especially when access to public resources is uneven. A murmur moved through the room again, but this time it wasn't mocking. It was uncertain, curious. Whitman leaned back, the echo of his earlier laughter still ringing in his ears like a bad memory. He remembered that case. Late nights. A bitter appeal. He remembered arguing for nuance, for mercy within the law. He hadn't expected to hear his own words used against him, especially not by a kid in a borrowed suit. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, regardless of enthusiasm, the defendant still entered private property unlawfully. Darius turned toward him, respectful. Yes, sir. And I don't deny that. But unlawful entry requires intent to remain without privilege. I left as soon as the alarm sounded. I didn't damage anything. I didn't resist. I cooperated. Whitman raised a hand, stopping the prosecutor mid-sentence. The room went still again. How did you learn all this? The judge asked. Darius hesitated. This wasn't a statute. This was personal. I read, he said finally, whenever I can. Something softened, just barely, in Whitman's face. Not enough to call it kindness, but enough to pause. He glanced at Naomi. She sat on the edge of the bench, eyes locked on her son, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked. Whitman sighed. Miss Cole, he said. Stand. Naomi rose, hands trembling. Did you know your son was studying law? She swallowed. I knew he liked books. I didn't know he liked them like this. Whitman nodded slowly, then looked back at Darius. You realize this court could still sentence you. Yes, Your Honor. And yet you chose to correct me. Darius met his gaze. I chose to trust the law. The words landed heavier than any accusation. Whitman felt them settle somewhere deep, uncomfortably close to pride and shame. He had laughed because it was easier, because assumptions were faster than listening. He cleared his throat. The court will take a brief recess. The gavel struck, sharp and final. People stood, whispering now without restraint. Naomi reached for Darius's hand. He squeezed back, grounding himself in the familiar feel of her skin, calloused, warm, real. As the judge disappeared through the side door, something unexpected happened. The court clerk, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, leaned toward Darius. You spoke well, she whispered. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. It was small, quiet, almost nothing, but Darius felt it like sunlight through a crack in the wall. If you were standing there watching a moment like that unfold, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, or stayed silent like so many do? Share your honest answer in the comments, and if this moment stirred something in you, tap like to show that empathy still has a place here. Minutes passed like hours. Darius replayed every word he'd said, wondering which one would cost him. Naomi stared at the closed door where the judge had gone, fear and hope battling in her chest. When Whitman returned, he looked different. Not warmer, but quieter, as if the room had followed him inside and forced him to listen. I've reviewed the case file, he said, settling back into his chair, and the defendant's explanation. The prosecutor stiffened. Whitman continued, Mr. Cole, you are correct about the precedent. I did write that opinion. A ripple of shock moved through the gallery. Whitman straightened his papers. However, knowledge does not place you above the law. Darius nodded. I understand. But, Whitman added, after a pause that stretched thin, it does demand that the law be applied correctly. Naomi's breath caught. Given the circumstances, the judge said, this court is inclined toward leniency. Community service. No record. Relief surged so fast Darius nearly swayed. Naomi covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. Whitman raised a finger. One condition. The room held its breath again. I want to know where you learned to argue like that, Whitman said. And why? Darius opened his mouth to answer, when suddenly the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a man in a tailored suit stepped inside, eyes fixed on Darius with unmistakable recognition. The man in the tailored suit didn't rush. He paused just inside the doorway, as if testing whether the room would accept him. He was in his early 40s, salt and pepper hair neatly combed, posture straight but unshowy. His eyes stayed on Darius, not curious, not amused, but searching, like he was looking at a reflection he didn't expect to see. Judge Whitman frowned. "This is a closed session," he said. "State your business." The man stepped forward. "My name is Michael Reeves," he said evenly. "I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor. I was asked to observe today's proceedings." "By whom?" Whitman asked. Reeves glanced at Darius again before answering. "By the Dean of Franklin Law School." The room shifted. Not loudly, no gasps, but the kind of shift that happens when everyone senses something important just brushed past them. Whitman raised an eyebrow. "And why would a law school dean send someone to my courtroom?" Reeves took another step forward. "Because last night, a security alert flagged a young man inside a private law library. The librarian didn't call the police first. She called us." Naomi's head snapped up. Darius's chest tightened. Reeves continued. "She said there was a boy reading appellate briefs by flashlight, taking notes, cross-referencing cases most first-year students struggle with. She said he didn't run when the alarm went off. He packed the books neatly and waited." Silence pressed in from all sides. Whitman looked at Darius now, not as a nuisance, not even as a defendant, but as a question he hadn't prepared for. "Is this true?" Darius nodded once. "Yes, sir." Reeves turned slightly, addressing the court. "I listened from the back today. I wasn't sure what I'd find." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "What I found was someone who doesn't just want the law, he understands it. Instinctively." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Naomi gripped the bench, knuckles white. Whitman exhaled slowly. "Mr. Reeves, are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting," Reeves said gently, "that this young man deserves an opportunity most people never even realize exists." The judge leaned back, eyes narrowing, not in anger, but in defense. "This court does not hand out scholarships." "No," Reeves agreed. "But it can choose not to crush potential when it appears unexpectedly." The words landed heavier than Darius expected. He'd come in prepared to defend himself, not to be seen. His heart thudded, uneven and loud. Whitman drummed his fingers against the bench. Years ago, he'd been a scholarship kid too. He remembered borrowed books. Remembered the shame of being the only one without a safety net. Somewhere along the way, he'd started mistaking survival for entitlement. He cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole," he said, "why law?" Darius swallowed. The answer wasn't neat. "Because rules decide who gets protected," he said quietly. "And I wanted to understand who writes them and why." Naomi closed her eyes. She'd never heard him say it out loud. Reeves nodded, as if something had clicked into place. "We run a pre-admission mentorship program," he said. "It's small, competitive, but we've never seen someone come in with this level of preparation on their own." Whitman looked at the boy again. 17. Tired eyes. Steady voice. "Life hasn't been generous to you, has it?" the judge asked. Darius hesitated, then answered honestly. "No, sir. But books were." Something in Whitman's expression finally broke. Not dramatically, not publicly, but enough that the laughter from earlier felt like it belonged to a different man. He nodded once. "The charge stands dismissed," he said. "With a warning." Naomi let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Darius's shoulders sagged as the weight lifted. Not all of it, but enough to breathe. Whitman wasn't finished. "And Mr. Cole," he added, "don't waste what you've been given. Not everyone gets a second look." Darius met his eyes. "I won't." As people filed out, Reeves approached Naomi and Darius. "I'd like to talk," he said softly. "If you're willing." Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt brighter. The walls were the same dull beige, but something had shifted inside Darius. Possibility, maybe? or fear dressed as hope. They sat on a bench near a window. Reeves explained the program. Mentors, classes, financial aid pathways. Nothing promised. Nothing easy. But real. Naomi listened, tears drying on her cheeks, disbelief slowly turning into something warmer. Darius stared out the window as traffic moved below, thinking about all the nights he'd read until his eyes burned, wondering if it mattered. Now, suddenly it did. Have you ever had someone step in for you when no one else would? If yes, write yes and share their name below. Sometimes gratitude deserves to be spoken out loud. Reeves stood to leave. Think about it, he said. We'll be in touch. As he walked away, Whitman appeared at the end of the hall, watching silently. For a moment, their eyes met, judge and boy, no words exchanged. Whitman turned and disappeared back into chambers. Darius sat there, heart pounding, knowing this wasn't the end of something painful, but the beginning of something terrifying and new. The beginning didn't feel like triumph. It felt like pressure. 3 weeks later, Darius stood in front of a brick building with Franklin Law School engraved above the doors, the letters sharp and unforgiving. The campus was quiet, summer air heavy with heat and ambition. Students passed by in small groups, laughing easily, carrying backpacks that looked expensive and lives that looked planned. Darius adjusted his collar. The suit was still borrowed. His shoes were scuffed. Naomi had hugged him that morning like she might not see him again, slipping $20 into his pocket even though he tried to refuse. Just in case, she'd said. Inside, the orientation room buzzed with conversation. Darius chose a seat in the back, instinctively. He listened more than he spoke. He always had. The mentorship program was intense. Classes during the day. Reading at night. Mock arguments that left his throat sore and his confidence shaken. For the first time, he wasn't the smartest person in the room, and that terrified him. Some students were kind. Others polite. A few looked at him the way Judge Whitman had at first. Curious, skeptical, dismissive. One afternoon, during a break, a student named Ethan laughed quietly when Darius mispronounced a Latin term. It's residential judicata, Ethan corrected, smirking. You'll get it. Eventually. Darius nodded, cheeks burning. He wrote the word down phonetically and practiced it under his breath later, alone. At night, he still studied in the car when Naomi worked late. The library hours weren't always enough. The glow from his phone lit the pages, mosquitoes buzzing against the windows. He didn't complain. He couldn't afford to. Weeks turned into months. Pressure built quietly, the way water fills a room when no one's watching. One evening, after a brutal mock trial where he froze mid-argument, Darius sat on the courthouse steps long after everyone else left. His hand shook. Doubt crept in, sharp and familiar. Maybe he'd been a fluke. A moment. Something the court found amusing before moving on. A shadow fell across him. Rough day? A voice asked. It was Michael Reeves. Darius shrugged. I forgot everything I knew. Reeves sat beside him, unbothered by the cold stone. No, he said. You learned how much you still don't know. That's different. Darius stared at the steps. Everyone else sounds like they belong. Reeves smiled gently. They sound like that because they've been told they do since birth. He paused. You weren't. The words hit harder than encouragement ever could. Reeves didn't sugarcoat. He didn't pity. He just stayed there, letting the silence breathe. You know, Reeves added, the best attorneys I've met aren't the loudest. They're the ones who listen long enough to find the truth hiding under noise. Darius nodded, something steadying inside him. Now it's your turn. Share one small good thing you've done recently. Write it below so others remember that humanity still lives. Your story might light someone's path tonight. The real test came in winter. Naomi collapsed during a night shift. Exhaustion. Dehydration. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Darius sat beside her bed, law books untouched in his bag, watching her chest rise and fall. You should be at school, she whispered when she woke. I am, he said. Right here. Bills stacked up. Rent fell behind. Darius considered quitting the program, just temporarily, he told himself. Just until things stabilized. Reeves noticed his absence before Darius explained it. "You don't disappear quietly," Reeves said over the phone. "That's not how this works." Darius told him everything. The words came out flat, practiced, like he'd been waiting to say them. Reeves listened. Then he said, "Come to my office tomorrow." The office was warm. Books lined the walls, older and kinder than the ones Darius knew. Reeves slid a folder across the desk. "Emergency housing grant," he said. "Short-term. No interest. No shame." Darius stared at it. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Reeves interrupted. "And someday you'll pass it forward." Tears blurred Darius's vision. He hadn't realized how badly he needed permission to accept help. Naomi recovered slowly. Darius caught up on classes at night, fueled by gratitude and fear in equal measure. He worked harder than before, not to prove himself, but because someone had believed him worth the effort. At the end of the year, the program held a final mock trial. Judges from the local circuit were invited to observe. Judge Harold Whitman sat in the front row. Darius felt his chest tighten. Old memories surfaced, the laughter, the doubt, the heat of humiliation. When his name was called, he stood anyway. He spoke clearly, calmly. He built his argument piece by piece, anticipating objections, acknowledging weaknesses instead of hiding them. The room leaned in again, just like before, but this time, he didn't wonder if he belonged. When it ended, the silence was different. Respectful. Whitman nodded once. Not approval. Recognition. As the room emptied, Whitman approached him. "You didn't waste it," the judge said quietly. Darius met his eyes. "Neither did you." Whitman paused, then gave a small, almost invisible smile. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, clean, covering old footprints as Darius stepped forward, unaware that the hardest test of all was still waiting. The hardest test didn't announce itself. It arrived quietly, disguised as success. 2 years later, Darius stood in a narrow apartment kitchen, tie loosened, phone pressed to his ear while rain traced slow lines down the window. He was 20 now. Still young. Still careful. But no longer invisible. "Congratulations," the voice on the other end said. "You've been accepted into the full law program." He closed his eyes. The words felt unreal, like something meant for someone else. When he hung up, he didn't shout. He didn't jump. He just leaned his forehead against the cool glass and breathed long, shaky breaths, until the weight of it settled into something solid. Naomi cried when he told her. Not the quiet tears from before, but the loud, breaking kind that came from relief finally winning a long fight. "You did it," she kept saying. "You really did it." But success has a way of shining a light on old wounds. At school, Darius's name started to circulate. Professors mentioned him as an example. Students asked for notes. Some smiled with genuine respect. Others smiled the way people do when they're measuring you. One afternoon, after a seminar on constitutional interpretation, a student stopped him in the hallway. "Hey," the guy said casually. "You're only here because of that courtroom thing, right?" Darius paused. "I'm here because I earned it." The guy laughed softly. "Relax. I just mean, it's a good story." That night, the doubt returned, louder than before. Darius lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if every door that opened would always come with an invisible asterisk. The breaking point came during a high-profile internship interview at a downtown firm. The office was all glass and steel, success polished to a shine. 3 partners sat across from him, resumes neatly stacked. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper tone, leaned forward. "You have an unusual background," she said. "Do you think that affects your objectivity?" Darius met her gaze. "It sharpens it." She smiled thinly. "Some might say it makes you biased." The word hung in the air, heavy and unfair. Darius felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the old instinct to shrink, to soften himself so others would feel comfortable. He didn't. "My background taught me who the law misses," he said evenly. "That's not bias. That's awareness." Silence followed. Not approval. Not rejection. Just the quiet after truth is spoken. He didn't get the internship. For the first time since the courtroom, the loss hurt deeper than expected. It wasn't just disappointment, it was exhaustion. He walked home instead of taking the bus, rain soaking through his jacket, thoughts spiraling. At a crosswalk, he noticed a small crowd gathered near a convenience store. Raised voices. A security guard arguing with a teenage boy, black, shaking, backpack clutched tight. "You stole something," the guard snapped. "I didn't," the boy said, voice cracking. "I swear." People watched. No one stepped in. Darius felt his feet move before his mind caught up. "Is there proof?" he asked calmly. The guard turned. "Mind your business." "It is my business," Darius said. "You're accusing him." The guard scoffed. "You his lawyer or something?" Darius held the boy's eyes, grounding him. "Not yet," he said. Then to the guard, "But if you're wrong, this could become a problem for you." A manager emerged, confused. Security footage was checked. The boy hadn't stolen anything. The crowd dispersed quickly, embarrassed by their silence. The boy looked up at Darius, eyes wide. "Thank you," he whispered. Darius nodded, heart pounding. As the boy ran off, something clicked into place. This was why the law mattered. Not prestige. Not approval. Presence. Later that night, Darius sat alone, replaying the moment. He thought about the judge, the library, the laughter that had once tried to reduce him to a joke, and how close he'd come to believing it. If that moment hit you hard, leave a red heart. Sometimes one small symbol says what our hearts can't. Weeks later, an email arrived. Another firm. Smaller. Less famous. More community-focused. They'd heard about him, not the courtroom story, but the convenience store one. Someone had recorded it. Shared it. Quiet courage travels faster than we think. Darius accepted. On his first day, as he stepped into the modest office with mismatched chairs and overfilled bookshelves, he felt something he hadn't felt before. Because he finally understood, the test was never about proving he belonged in their world. It was about deciding what kind of world he wanted to help build. The peace didn't last long, but it changed how the pain felt. The firm was called Hawthorne and Vale, tucked between a laundromat and a closed-down diner. It smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, and the walls were covered with photos of clients who'd won small victories no one else cared about. Wrongful evictions stopped. Charges reduced. Families kept together. Darius learned fast. Not just case law, but people. He learned how fear sat in a client's shoulders, how shame made them avoid eye contact, how hope showed up only after someone listened long enough. One evening, close to closing time, a new file landed on his desk. State versus Cole. He frowned. Same last name. Coincidence, he told himself, until he opened it. The defendant was Liam Cole. 15. Charged with assault after a fight at school. Video footage existed, but it was incomplete. Witness statements conflicted. The recommended sentence included juvenile detention. Darius's throat tightened. He skimmed the notes, pulse quickening. The judge assigned to the case. Harold Whitman. For a long moment, the office noise faded. Old echoes returned. Laughter. Assumptions. The weight of being seen as a problem before being seen as a person. "You okay?" asked Grace, a senior associate, leaning into his doorway. Darius nodded slowly. "I think this case is mine." The first meeting with Liam was rough. The boy sat hunched in a chair, hoodie pulled low, anger simmering just under the surface. "They already think I did it," Liam muttered. "So what's the point?" Darius didn't rush him. He remembered that feeling too well. "The point," he said, "is that the truth doesn't get louder unless someone carries it." Liam glanced up, uncertain. Over the next week, Darius dug deep. He tracked down teachers. Watched footage frame by frame. Found the missing minutes no one bothered to look for. The second camera. A different angle. The fight hadn't started with Liam. The night before the hearing, Darius sat at his desk long after everyone else left. Rain tapped against the window, familiar and steady. He rehearsed the argument, but his mind kept drifting, to Whitman. To forgiveness. To whether he even wanted it. "Be honest, could you forgive after what they did?" Type forgive, if you could, or never, if it would break you too deeply. The courtroom felt smaller this time. Or maybe Darius had grown into it. Liam sat beside him, leg bouncing nervously. His mother wrung her hands, eyes darting toward the bench. Judge Whitman entered, older now. Slower. His gaze passed over Darius without recognition, then snapped back. A flicker crossed his face. Surprise. Something like regret. Counsel, Whitman said carefully. Darius stood. Your Honor. The hearing began. The prosecution laid out their case, confident and clean. Darius listened, pen still, letting them finish. When it was his turn, he rose calmly. He didn't mention himself. He didn't mention history. He mentioned facts. He presented the second camera angle. The timestamps. The witness who'd been overlooked. He spoke about fear, about how teenagers react when cornered, about how intent can't be measured by the loudest voice in the room. Whitman leaned forward, eyes sharp, not mocking. Listening. At the end, Darius paused. This court has the power to decide whether a young life is defined by its worst moment, he said. Or whether justice can still be precise. Silence followed. Whitman removed his glasses. His voice, when it came, was steady, but different from before. The charges are dismissed, he said. With counseling recommended. Liam's breath hitched. His mother collapsed into tears. As the room emptied, Whitman remained seated. Mr. Cole, he said quietly. Darius turned. I owe you an apology, the judge said. Not loud. Not public. But real. For the day I laughed. Darius felt something loosen in his chest. Not satisfaction. Release. I know, he said simply. Whitman nodded, eyes glistening. You became what I forgot to protect. Outside, Liam grabbed Darius in a fierce hug before running to his mother. Darius stood alone for a moment, sunlight warming the courthouse steps, understanding that forgiveness wasn't forgetting, it was choosing not to carry the weight forward. And in that choice, something new had begun to rise. What rose afterward wasn't applause or headlines. It was quieter than that. Slower. Like a light turning on in rooms that had stayed dark for years. Liam's case spread through the neighborhood before it ever reached the news. Not the legal details, those were too complex, but the feeling of it. A boy went home instead of away. A mother slept without fear. Word traveled the way hope usually does, mouth to mouth, careful and fragile. People started showing up at Hawthorne and Vale asking for Darius by name. An older man facing eviction. A single father caught in a custody fight he didn't understand. A teenage girl accused of something she couldn't even explain without crying. Darius didn't promise miracles. He promised presence. He listened. He prepared. He showed up. Some nights, he left the office after midnight, shoulders aching, mind buzzing with unfinished arguments. Other nights, he walked home in silence, letting the city breathe around him. The hum of traffic, the glow of streetlights, the soft reminder that he wasn't alone in this anymore. Naomi noticed the change before anyone else. You look tired, she said one evening as they shared takeout at their small kitchen table. He smiled faintly. Good tired. She studied him, eyes shining with something close to pride and something closer to peace. You know, she said, there were days I prayed you'd just survive. Darius met her gaze. I know. And now? He thought for a moment. Now I want to make it easier for someone else. The call came a month later. A public defender's office across town needed help on a class action case, wrongful sentencing patterns in juvenile court. The data pointed to one courtroom more than any other. Judge Harold Whitman's. Darius held the phone in silence after the offer was made. Old memories stirred, but they didn't bite the way they used to. When he agreed, the weight felt right. The hearings stretched on for weeks. Statistics. Testimonies. Faces blurred together, young, scared, mislabeled. Darius spoke when needed, but more often he listened. He watched Whitman too. The judge asked more questions now. Slower ones. Better ones. Change didn't come all at once. But it came. New review policies. Sentencing reforms. Oversight committees. Not perfect, but better. On the final day, as reporters packed up their cameras, Whitman approached Darius in the hallway. No bench between them this time. No titles. "You changed my court," Whitman said quietly. Darius shook his head. "You let it change." Whitman nodded. "That matters." Later that evening, Darius walked past the old courthouse alone. The steps were empty now, bathed in the soft orange of sunset. He sat where he once waited as a boy, heart pounding, unsure if the world would be cruel or fair. He thought of the library, the flashlight, the laughter that once tried to tell him who he was, and how none of it had one. If you believe love still wins, comment, "Amen." Let's fill this space with hope, because someone reading right now might need to see it. Darius stood and kept walking. Years passed, not in a montage but in moments. Cases won. Cases lost. Lives nudged just enough to change direction. He taught part-time at night, mentoring students who reminded him of himself, hungry, uncertain, brilliant in quiet ways. One evening, a young man stayed after class. Nervous. Sharp. "Sir," he said, "how did you know you could do this? Even when everyone else doubted you?" Darius smiled gently. "I didn't. I just kept going anyway." The student nodded, something settling into place. On the anniversary of his first court appearance, Darius returned to the private law library, the same one, now renovated and open late through a community access program. He ran his fingers along the shelves, familiar and comforting. At a table near the window, a teenager sat reading by lamplight, lost in thought. Darius paused, watching quietly, then walked past without interrupting. Some moments didn't need saving. Just space. Outside, the city hummed, imperfect and alive. Darius breathed it in, knowing the story wasn't about proving genius or shaming a judge. It was about what happens when someone refuses to become smaller just to survive. And as he stepped into the night, steady and unafraid, the warmth that followed him wasn't pride. It was purpose. Purpose has a strange way of circling back. The letter arrived on a quiet Tuesday, slipped under the office door sometime between client meetings and cold coffee. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, official. Darius almost set it aside, until he saw the return address. Franklin Law School. Office of the Dean. He opened it slowly. They were inviting him back. Not as a student. As a guest speaker. A short talk to incoming first years about equity in the law. About paths that don't start straight. About why justice needs more than brilliance. It needs memory. That night, Darius stood alone in his apartment, the city glowing beyond the window. He thought of the boy he'd been, the borrowed suit, the tight hands, the laugh that had tried to shrink him. He thought of Naomi, of Reeves, of Liam, of Whitman learning to listen. And he thought of how easily it all could have gone another way. The auditorium was full when he stepped onto the stage weeks later. Young faces. Nervous smiles. The quiet hunger of people about to begin something hard. Darius didn't start with triumph. He started with fear. He talked about the nights in a car, studying by phone light. About being misunderstood. About how the law could wound just as deeply as it could heal, depending on who held it. He didn't name the judge. He didn't name himself as the hero. He spoke about choice. When you learn the law, he said, voice steady, you gain power. The question isn't whether you'll use it. It's who you'll protect when you do. The room was silent. Not the empty kind, but the full one. Afterward, students lined up to thank him. One girl wiped her eyes. One boy nodded without speaking. Darius recognized the look. The moment when something fragile decides to stay alive. Outside, Naomi waited near the steps. Older now. Softer around the edges. Still strong. You did good, she said, squeezing his hand. He smiled. You did better. They walked together as the sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the campus. For a moment, time folded in on itself, past and present sharing the same light. Before they reached the car, Darius paused. He turned back, looking at the building one last time. If this story moved you, he thought, not just for himself, but for every quiet soul who ever stood unseen, don't scroll past silently. Tap like, not for applause, but for the ones who carried pain and still chose kindness. One small click can say, I saw you. I felt you. He didn't say it out loud. He lived it. Years later, people would ask about the case that made his name. The judge. The genius moment. The twist. Darius always corrected them gently. It wasn't about being smart, he'd say. It was about being heard. And then deciding to listen back. Because the real miracle wasn't that a racist judge learned the truth. It was that a boy who had every reason to harden, chose not to. And in doing so, he didn't just change one courtroom. He changed the shape of justice for everyone who came after.